Evening, fellow grognards. It's me, your host with the most, Cody Broussard. I have been away for a while. Sorry it's been so long since I've posted any videos or done any episodes, but it's been a pretty busy time past few months. I've been working out of town, and I've had some other personal things come up, and so it's been pretty hard, if not impossible, for me to do any content or whatnot. But as promised, for anybody that's still sticking around for this, we are going to examine the rest of original Dungeons and Dragons. So last time we talked about Min and Magic, and this time around we're going to look at Monsters and Treasure. We might combine Underworld and Wilderness Adventures. We might include that booklet in this episode. It just depends how quickly we get through Monsters and Treasures. We'll just have to see. It might be split into two episodes. I don't know. Just depends how I feel and how long this episode runs. I will talk briefly just what I've been up to lately. Again, I've been pretty busy. I've been working out of town, out in the middle of nowhere, so I really haven't had much internet access. And on top of that, I haven't really been able to do any gaming either. Luckily, I'm back in town now, back to regular work. So, but unfortunately, I'm working 7 days a week, so that's why I have dark circles under my eyes and my beard looks a little scruffy. But I am about to return to some gaming, thankfully, and I'm currently in the process of planning a new campaign, Castles and Crusades and D&D. So that should be fun. And if anybody's interested, post in the comments or something. Maybe I'll talk about what I'm working on with my new campaign. The other thing I've been doing is I've always done this, but lately I've really been looking into taking some different approaches in my DM style, and really been researching game master philosophy and game theory and whatnot. And I'm going to try some new things in this upcoming campaign, and I'll let you guys know how that goes and what those things are. But tonight we're still doing the deep examination of original Dungeons and Dragons, one of my favorite versions of the game. And we were looking at Monsters and Treasure, Volume 2 of the original three booklets. And here's the actual booklet out of my set. And I've got the handy PDF here so we can all look and read together. So Monsters and Treasure, what this is, again, for those, a little recap, the original white box and wood grain box came with three booklets. It came with Min and Magic, Monsters and Treasure, and the Underworld and Wilderness Adventures. And basically, these are your equivalents of the Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, and Dungeon Master's Guide, or what later would become. So Monsters and Treasure, as you can imagine, is pretty much your equivalent of your modern-day Monster Manual, combined with, obviously, it's got, as it says on the book, it has Monsters and Treasure. It also has treasure in here. So here we go. Dungeons & Dragons, Volume 2, Monsters and Treasure by Gary Gygax, Dave Arneson. There's Gary's signature from somebody else's book. Copyright 1974. Index, and jumps right into it. No introduction in this one. Just jumps right into monster tables. So these probably look very familiar to anyone that's familiar with old school D&D. And a lot of these, I've said this in the last episode, a lot of these things do, because this is where all these core concepts came from, was this. A lot of this will look very, very similar, but there is a lot of oddities in original D&D, and I'm going to point those out. Point out the differences and the oddities that didn't carry over. But a lot of this looks very similar to what most gamers are used to from D&D. So you can see here it tells you monster type, and it has a listing of all the different monster types. I don't think these are in any order, really. They don't seem to be. No, they're just kind of randomly spread out in this chart here. So what do you got here? Well, you got monster type. It tells you what kind of monster you have. Number appearing, and it gives a random number. So it'll tell you later on in this chart the number appearing. Referee's option: increase or decrease according to party concerned. Used primarily only for outdoor encounters. Now, one thing to point out here is a lot of these numbers are really large. Why that is, I'm not 100% certain, but people I've talked to and just kind of extrapolating the history of the game, I think a lot of these large numbers is because Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson and the original DMs, and I said this in the last episode too, were running really large groups. So I think they assumed everybody would be running pretty large groups, and that's why they gave these large numbers. So it says, these are only primarily for outdoor encounters. And in later editions, I believe, they put the number appearing in it. I didn't do enough research into that before the episode, but I'm kind of curious. I kind of want to go over there and look in the first edition DM's guide to see what the difference is. I think I will do that. Hold on just a second. Yeah, I'm kind of curious what some of the differences are. So I'm going to look up Goblin here, just for shits and giggles. Goblin. So the interesting thing to note is, and I thought this was pretty true. It's been a while since I've looked at first edition books, but it's pretty much the same thing. They pretty much extrapolated the same thing, even the large numbers of appearing. If I remember right, in AD&D, it's, number appearing, and I'm going to look, average spread that is numbers should only be altered as suits. It does say it's not generally recommended for use in establishing the population of dungeon levels. And it's pretty vague about what that actually means. I think it's second edition, and that's what I was kind of, one of the things I was curious about is in second edition, I think it corresponds to the monster's layer. It's layer only, whatever. But anyways, I think the reason behind these large numbers, and from what I understand, is probably because of the large groups that these, original game masters and dungeon masters were playing with, and they thought they probably needed that amount of creatures. So I don't know. But anyways, so that's number appearing, and it's kind of a interesting thing to point out, and I guess it remains true in AD&D. To be honest, I've never used these for any kind of guidelines. Of always, I think we all do kind of balanced however many monsters we need for however many players we have. Whatever we think is balanced or not balanced, whatnot. And then you have armor class. Of course, you've got your descending armor class. Interesting thing to note, though, with armor class in original Dungeons and Dragons, it doesn't go any lower than 2. It doesn't go any lower. So you can have magical shields and things, armor, which we'll look at. It works a little differently in original Dungeons and Dragons than it does in other versions. So your armor class never really goes below 2. Now, this was altered fairly quickly, I think, in the supplements, but in the original 3 booklets, it goes, I believe it goes from 9 to 2. So, movement. So movement's in inches, not just like an AD&D, I believe. It's not, it's not in feet or anything. It's in inches. Um, so if you're using miniatures, it tells you. And the number before the slash is ground movement. The number after the slash is flying movement. Hit dice. This is how many dice you roll to determine hit points. The only difference here is that in AD&D, it's 8-sided dice, and in original Dungeons and Dragons, it's 6-sided dice for hit dice. All hit dice are 6-sided, unless it states otherwise. There might be a couple cases in here, and we'll have to look as we're going through this. There might be a couple cases where that's not true, but over 90%, it's a 6-sided dice. Percentage in layer. Hmm. Yeah, so that's fairly unchanged from AD&D, I think. Pretty much the same. Amount or type of treasure. So that again, this is pretty much unchanged. It'll tell you, a corresponding letter, and you will see when we get to the treasure department there. You go, you go to the treasure chart, and it has, gold and silver and copper and magic items and whatnot, and whatever the letter type is, and it'll give you a percentage of what the chances are of that treasure being there. And in this case, in the original D&D, it's suggests only using this for a layer of this type of monster. So yeah. So you've got there's a pretty small selection of monsters here. It's not huge, and you've got a lot of your standard things. You got men, kobolds, goblins, which are kind of grouped in the same. Orcs, hobgoblins, gnolls, ogres, trolls, giants, skeletons, zombies, ghouls, wights. Et cetera, et cetera. One interesting thing to note, though, is a lot of the quintessential, not quintessential, I guess, but iconic D&D monsters. A lot of them are missing here. One I can tell you is in here is the purple worm. The purple worm's in here, which is cool. Iconic D&D monster. But if you look through the rest of the list here, there's no beholder. There's an invisible stalker. Invisible stalker does make its appearance in here. The jellies and the puddings, slimes, oozes, molds, those things are in here. But there's no beholders in here. There's no, owlbears. There's no boulets, things of that nature. And those come in, later in some of the supplements, which we'll look at when we look at those supplements. So yeah, just like every other edition, this is your general summary of all your monsters. Moving on. So this is kind of interesting. Special abilities, it refers to, in all the original D&D pamphlets, it's going to always refer you back to Chainmail. And that's quite interesting. It's kind of assumed you're going to use Chainmail in conjunction with this, even though, from what I understand, even Gary's group didn't much use Chainmail very long. They did initially, and they quickly switched to alternatives. But it still references Chainmail to be used, and I don't think many people really used it. From what I understand, I talked to a lot of players that played at that time, and they didn't. I don't think any of them really tended to use Chainmail. This is an interesting thing to point out. Attack defense. So it's again, assuming you're using Chainmail and you're going to use the man-on-man or what attack tables. So the way that works is, and this kind of explains it a little bit, is that for every hit dice of the creature, you make a roll. You get an attack for every hit dice. So a monster, say, Minotaur, has 6 hit dice. So he'll make 6 rolls, And if he has a bonus, he only adds them to one of those rolls. And this is probably how, this is what it's assumed. Yeah, I didn't mean to highlight that, but this is what is assumed, characters do too, if you're using the man-on-man chainmail system. All right, monster descriptions. So here we go into the good stuff. I'm not going to go into detail with every monster, but we'll point out some things if I see them. So we're in men here, just like in a lot of the older versions of D&D. I quite like a lot of this. Is it gives different types of men, not just men. I don't know. They might not even have men in the Modern Monsters manual, but back in the day, they, we all know, all us old school gamers know that back in the day they had an entry for men and different types of men, and so they have men, bandits, and they give you some things about bandits, and just like in AD&D, for every certain amount of it gives kind of guidelines for every certain amount of bandits. There'll be like a higher level fighting man or a cleric or whatnot. One thing, another, just like we were talking about earlier, an interesting thing to point out is it's still talking about these large numbers here, which is quite interesting. It's still bringing up these 200, 150, 100 bandits and stuff. So it's kind of interesting. And then it'll tell you, like each of those types, percentage chance of what they'll have for, they might have like magical weapons and armor or rings or whatnot, magical items. And kind of gives an example how to do that. And, nothing really different here than in AD&D, right? Berserkers, pretty much the same as men, except they add +2 to their die score when rolling due to their ferocity. Kind of cool. Brigands, except they have +1 morale and chaos alignment. Dervishes, nomads, buccaneers, pirates, cavemen, mermen. Yeah, and that's all the different types of men. Again, I like that. I always like that ever since I picked up a monster manual and saw the entry men, and it actually really gave you some ideas. What they're not just men. There's all kinds of people, right? And humans are supposed to, I think, in most people's conception of D&D, humans are the predominant species in the world. So it's cool to have a lot of variety, I think, as far as it should be. Goblins. Again, here we go again. It refers back to Chainmail. It tells you they see well in darkness and dim light, just like in most versions of D&D, I think. When subjected to full daylight, they subtract -1 from their attack and morale. They attack dwarves in sight. Their hit dice must always equal at least 1 pip. I think because they get D6 -1 hit dice, if I'm not mistaken. They get 1 to 1.5, or what is it? 1 minus 1.5 or some, I don't know. But anyways, they get a penalty to their hit dice, I believe. Kobolds are pretty much the same, except they only get a D3 hit dice. See, here's one difference from the D6 hit dice. Orcs, got your orcs. Again, it kind of breaks it down just like we're used to, where it tells you, kind of gives recommendations of, what would be in a goblin settlement, or I'm tired, orc settlement or lair or village or whatnot. And it gives different variations of that: hobgoblins, gnolls, ogres. This is one thing to point out, and is that a plus to hit or damage in original Dungeons and Dragons is a big deal. A +1 to hit, well, I think it is in AD&D too, but in original D&D, it's a really big deal. So when you see, monsters that deal dice damage, because remember, everybody deals a single dice of damage, regardless of what kind of weapon you're using or whatnot. So if you're everybody's dealing dice damage, and you don't have any damage bonuses from strength, remember. but ogres do. They get +2, right? And you'll see that some other creatures do as well. So that's a big deal. They deal dice +2 damage, and you got to remember hit dice are only a die on average too. So yeah, trolls. Trolls are still the same. They regenerate hit points. It's interesting to note also they have their strength are about equal to an ogre. But it does say they only use their talons and fangs for weapons. Only 1 die of damage is scored when they hit an opponent. So they don't get the damage bonus of ogres, but they're considered as strong as an ogre. And it's also interesting to point out that it does give recommendations for a single monster. Some of these monsters, it tells you, like these ogres, wandering, ogre outside its lair will carry from 1 to 600, 1d6 times 100 gold pieces. And it does give some other suggestions for some of the monsters that they might carry, some hefty treasure with them, like a giant. Here's a giant. One interesting thing to note about the giant, he scores 2 dice of damage, which is a lot, and 1 to 6,000 gold pieces. And of course, all the different quintessential giants. I guess here's another, D&D trope we all know and love. All the different types of giants, just like dragons. Hill giant, stone giant, frost giant, fire giant, cloud giant, and unusual characteristics. Like a stone giant throws as a heavy catapult, and you'd have to go look up heavy catapult in Chainmail to see what that does. Frost giant, impervious to cold, two dice +1 damage. Fire giant, impervious to fire, 2 dice +2 damage. Cloud giant, keen sense of smell, 3 dice of damage. That's a lot. That's a lot of damage. Skeleton zombies. Same thing as usual, except they don't take morale checks. I think that's the same in AD&D. I think one interesting thing to note here, though, just off the top of my head, is the skeletons in AD&D only take half damage from slashing weapons, and then here in original D&D, it doesn't. I don't think it mentions anything about that. So that's an interesting difference. Ghouls still pretty much the same. They can paralyze when they touch someone. And of course, any man type killed by a ghoul becomes one. Whites, pretty much the same. Energy removing, draining energy levels is started here and is a thing. So a lot of these undead creatures, drain levels from characters, and whites do in this. Race, pretty much the same, and this is a D&D trope that's was introduced here at the very beginning. Probably still a thing. I don't know too much about modern D&D, but I'm sure it's still a thing in D&D. Excuse me. Certain creatures can only be hit by silver or magical weapons, and this is all started here. Mummies, they still have the rotting disease. Vampires, still very powerful, with a slew of all kinds of abilities. Cockatrice, less powerful but more mobile basilisk. It turns opponents to stone by touch, as opposed to the basilisk turns people to stone by sight. It's able to fly. Non-intelligent basilisk, same thing, except that any who meet its gaze are turned to stone. Medusa, same kind of deal. Gorgons, Manicoras. I don't know if that's a misprint. I've never noticed it till today when I was rereading through these that it's Manicoras in this, and it is in my printing too. I'd be kind of interested to look in some other printings, see if it's Manicore or Manicora in every edition. Hydra. It's pretty much the same in every other old school version. Every head has a different hit dice, and when you know um, when it's okay, so it's assumed each has assumed to have it's assumed to have 6 heads, 6 hit dice per head, and when it scores 6 damage, one of those heads is killed. Chimera, wyverns, dragons, the good stuff. Yeah, so dragons, you know, a lot of the iconic D&D dragons are here. Again, the colors of dragons. That was, I think, pretty much the idea of that was kind of introduced here in D&D. I mean, there were other always different colored dragons, but D&D really set them apart, I think, and really gave them, dragons some character doing it like this. And I think it's become a fantasy trope by this point because of D&D. So, you got all the different colors here and what they're associated with: white, cold, black, acid, green, chlorine gas. And this is probably still the same today. I don't think it's ever changed. Hit dice, how many hit dice they have. The percentage chance of them talking, percentage chance of them being asleep. Their breath weapons are, it's tell you this is the chart to determine how old the dragon is, and then value of hit dice and breath weapon. So every hit dice they have, they have a certain amount of dice they roll per damage for their breath weapon. So that's extremely powerful. And here's some special characteristics. Some of these dragons, just like in future versions of D&D, have a chance to use magic. It tells you where they frequent, where their layers may be, and so forth and so on. Attacking dragons, sleeping dragons, may be attacked with a free melee round by the attacker and a +2 to hit. +2 chance to hit, basically. This is kind of interesting, and I don't remember this being in any other version of D&D. Certain types of weapons and attacks will affect different types of dragons differently. I don't remember seeing that. It might be in AD&D. I haven't looked at the first edition monster manual in so long. I've got it right here, so I'll take a peek real quick. Besides, it's been a while since I've looked at dragon entries, because it's been a long time since anybody in my campaigns has fought a dragon. Yeah, it's still in there. It's exactly the same. I forgot all about that. So, but yeah, so it's present here too in original D&D. Subduing dragons, gives rules for subduing a dragon rather than killing it. I remember that being in pretty much every version of old school D&D. And then it gives you, value of a subdued dragon, how long they'll be subdued, which is really cool. It's cool that it gives this whole thing about subduing dragons, and that there's value in, selling parts or a dragon or whatever. It kind of tells you about 2 or more dragons. If 2 dragons are encountered, they'll be mated pair with at least the 4th age category. If 3 or 4 dragons are encountered, they constitute a family group of male, female, and 1 or 2 young. So it kind of gives the composition of basically a family of dragons, what that would look like. Dragon treasure, it tells you how to adjust the treasure according to the age of the dragon, because an older dragon would have acquired a bigger hoard as opposed to a younger dragon, etc. Gargoyles, lycanthropes, all your core quintessential lycanthropes are here. Werewolf, wereboar, weretiger, werebear. No were-rats, though. They're not in here. Purple worm. Mighty purple worm is in here. Just as nasty in the original version of D&D as it was later on, and still is. Sea monsters, minotaurs, centaurs. This is an interesting thing to point out about the Minotaurs, and we'll get into this when we look at Underworld. God, I don't know why that trips me out. Underworld and Wilderness Adventures is it gives guidelines for monsters pursuing characters through a dungeon. And Minotaurs, first off, they always attack. They don't check morale, and they will always pursue. So that's actually kind of a big deal, because if you're running away from monsters, it actually has a chance. I think it's a 1 in 2 chance every time you take a corner in a dungeon. Every time you take a corner, you have a 1 in 2 chance to evade that monster. And Minotaurs, they'll just keep pursuing you as long as they can see you. So it's kind of interesting. Centaurs, unicorns, nixies, all your little annoying creatures here, nixies and pixies, dryads. A lot of these abilities and stuff these creatures have, again, are things that have been carried over even today, and in future editions of D&D. They just kind of copy and pasted a lot of this and expanded on it. Like somebody else said, everything after original D&D is just a clone. It's just a retro. It's just a retro clone. Dwarves, elves. I don't think it goes in. It doesn't. It doesn't. In AD&D, it actually goes into detail about different types of dwarves and elves and things. It doesn't go into detail about that here. It doesn't say there's different types of dwarves or elves, like gray elves, high elves, whatever. Trents, the Ints. In this printing, it's been changed to Trents. Of course, we all know that in earlier versions of original D&D, the Tolkien references were actually in the books, and they were taken out around the 5th or 6th printing, if I remember right. So they left them. They left the creatures and stuff in there. They just changed their names. So Trents are Ints, from Tolkien mythology. Pegasi, hippogriffs, rocks, griffins, visible stalkers, another quintessential creature from D&D. Everybody remembers. Elementals, that's another quintessential D&D monster. That's a very iconic monster, is the elementals. Djinns, frites, the jellies and puddings and slimes. These are very iconic D&D monsters. The oozes, molds, horses, insects and small animals. It kind of groups all these, together, saying they, have an armor class of 8 and usually have 1 hit dice. Large insects are animals, and it kind of gives examples about what you can do with that. And then it kind of is like, well, you can, other monsters, there's no practical limitation of the variety of monsters possible. And this is scattered all through the 3 original booklets, is, make it up yourself. It really presents this, the 3 booklets really present the idea that, this is your game. These are our suggestions for running a game. Take it as your will, and make it your own. It really encourages that, and it states it over and over and over in all 3 of the books. And this is no different. It's basically telling you these are some of the other monsters we used. Make stats for them. Have fun. And some more cool old school art. Gelatinous cube. There's a famous iconic monster, just thrown in there as an example, and it doesn't even have stats. This is kind of cool. Robots, golems, and androids, showing a lot of the gonzo play that was going on around this era of D&D. And it gives some other things about John Carter of Mars later on in the Underworld and Wilderness book. And here it talks about robots, golems, androids, and stuff like that. So here we are, treasure table. You know, this probably looks really similar to what everybody's used to in the treasure table. This is recommended used for certain creatures' layers. The way I usually use this is I just, if you, I don't use the number of monsters appearing, and I usually translate this to thousands to hundreds, and just go from there. That's usually how I've always treated these treasure tables. I don't know, but yeah, it's very similar to the AD&D treasure table. Not too much different here. It gives thousands of different copper, silver, gold, gems and jewelry, and maps of magic, and then you roll a percentage dice based on the type of creature, its corresponding letter, and that's the chance it has those types of treasure. And it also tells you, certain, it's telling you about certain men here will have individual amounts of silver or gold on them. And here it is. Note all treasures found in those cases where the encounter takes place in the lair. Okay. That's its recommendation, anyways. So here we go. Magic items. Not much different here. This looks really similar to AD&D or basic expert, right? You will notice that they're just like in BX and BECME, which are pretty much kind of a update of this, is the biggest magical weapon and armor you're going to see is a +3. Biggest you're going to see. And magical armor and weapons work differently in this version of D&D than they do in any other version. We'll talk about that just in a moment here. But I want to scroll down, see if I see anything else interesting. Excuse me. All your stuff's here, a lot of the quintessential iconic D&D potions and things are in here. Scrolls, right? Rings, wands, and staffs. Miscellaneous magic. I kind of want to look through this, see if there's any. There's probably a few iconic things in here. Displacer cloak, I guess. Elven cloak and boots. That's a really, iconic one, I think. Horn of blasting. That's a really, famous, iconic one. Gauntlets of ogre power. Girdle of giant strength. These are items I think every classic D&D player's encountered that have been around since the beginning, right? Maps, I'll tell you what the map, if you get a map, what it leads to. Swords, this is no different than any other old school version. You roll C. Only swords have this. They might have an alignment, an ego, and additional powers, and all sorts of things. And only swords have that, not other magical weapons. Extraordinary abilities, etc., etc. And the sword entry is quite long. 1, 2, 3, like 3.5 pages. Just to detail magical swords and their abilities. So swords are quite powerful. And we'll go ahead and talk about this. Is that as I was saying, magical weapons and armor are quite different, right, than other versions of D&D. And where they're different is magical weapons, miscellaneous weapons that are not a sword. If it's a plus weapon, it only gives you a bonus to damage, not to hit. Swords give you a bonus to hit, but not to damage, unless it states a certain bonus against certain creatures. So, for example, If you have a sword +1, but +2 versus lycanthropes, well, it's +2 uh, damage and a hit versus lycanthropes. So that's a really big difference. And I think it's only damage bonus, right? So if it says +2 versus, sorry, +2 versus lycanthropes, it's only lycanthropes. I gotta get something to drink. Oh wow, sorry about that. A little dry in the throat. Armor's different too. We were talking about this earlier in the entry. Is that armor does not add or subtract to your. It doesn't make your armor class better. It subtracts from the your opponent's score to hit. Okay. And I believe shields are the same way. It also says if the shield's bonus is greater than that of the armor, there is a 1/3 chance that the blow will be caught by the shield, thus giving the additional subtraction. Okay. So I think it's what it's saying here is armor, shields. It's one or the other. Um, but if shield's bonus is greater than your armor bonus, the shield has a chance to deflect the blow. We just talked about miscellaneous weapons and how that works. It's only a bonus to your damage. Now, I think this, again, last episode, I talked about house rules. uh, this is something even like I've noticed a lot of original D&D players are not even aware of this because they didn't really delve this far into the rules. They didn't really minutely read the rules. So when they see a plus weapon, a lot of people just assume, oh, it's +1 to hit and damage because that's how it is in every version of D&D. So I think a lot of people, coming into this from future editions, just assume that's the way it works, but it doesn't by the book. But again, I think a lot of people house rule this. I do usually, if it's a plus weapon, I think people are just used to that. So if it's a +1 mace or whatever, it's +1 hit and damage, right? I don't really do this, but that's the way it's supposed to work in original D&D, and I have played that way. But I think most people don't. So it's interesting to point out because that is a big difference. Scrolls, not too much different here. They're assumed to be, 6th level unless necessarily higher. And it gives you, chart to roll for scrolls and whatnot. Rings, same thing. A lot of the iconic D&D magical rings are here. The 3 wishes and regeneration, Jinn summoning, telekinesis. Very cool stuff. Spell storing. Wands and staff. Good stuff there. Again, you still got a lot of your iconic D&D magic items here. Let's see, what else? Bag of Holding. There's a very iconic D&D item I think we've all know and love. Elven Cloak and Boots. Big difference here, though, is the Elven Cloak and Boots just states wearing the cloak makes a person next invisible, while the boots allow for totally silent movement. It doesn't tell you, it doesn't give you a bonus or anything like that. It just tells you you're basically invisible and you're totally silent. Nobody's going to hear you. You just are. Horn of Blasting. That's the effect of a double bombard. See Volume 3 and Chainmail. So again, it brings you back to Chainmail to look for these things instead of just inserting it in here. Gauntlets of Ogre Power. Very powerful. And no difference in this. Girdle of Giant Strength. It does have, saving throws for magic items, just like in other versions of D&D. Artifacts. So interesting thing here, it doesn't really have any of the, quintessential, iconic artifacts that we all know and love in the original 3 booklets. It just tells you basically to make up your own, and it gives you some things, some examples and things you can do with that. So that's kind of interesting. Again, a lot of this, make it your own. Treasure. This is one difference, and it's kind of whatever. I think it's something everybody house rules, but I guess it's interesting to point out that the exchange rate is 1 gold equals 10 silver pieces, 1 silver equals 5 copper pieces. A little bit of a difference. I think in AD&D it was something else. I forget what it is off the top of my head. 20 silver pieces equals a gold or something. Chart for gems, not too much different there. Jewelry, same thing. Tells you how much, randomly how much a piece of jewelry and gems are worth. Some more cool art. And of course the back splash page. And I've been going on for about 45 minutes or so. So I think we're going to leave Underworld and Wilderness Adventure for next time. But hope you guys enjoyed this look through Monsters and Treasure. And thanks for, sticking around if you have, and thanks for watching the video. I'm sorry I haven't been able to do much lately. I basically do these videos for my own personal fun. And also, to encourage and spread the love of old school D&D and everything I like about it. So thanks for tuning in, guys. And again, next time we will look at Underworld and Wilderness Adventures, and then we will look at after that we'll look into the supplements. And in between there, I'm hoping pretty soon we'll have another episode of Grognar Grumbles coming along the block. And maybe in between this look into original D&D, maybe I will do some other things like I was talking about. Maybe I'll talk about my own D&D campaigns, the campaign I'm currently working on, and all the different rules and philosophies I'm fiddling around with. Anyways, guys, have a good night. Until next time. Bye.